In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. I am super excited to speak with today's guest. He's an entrepreneur and passionate leader in the robotics sector. His innovative work bridges the intricate world of human motor control with cutting-edge robotics. He leads a robotics company that delivers full-stack robot dexterity solutions for key industries, including logistics, warehousing, and supply chain operations. His company has won numerous awards, including CB Insight's Most Promising Retail Tech Companies, the American Dynamism Award by A16Z, as well as recognition by Forbes as a Best Startup Employer. He is the founder and CEO of Dexterity. Samir Menon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm looking forward to the conversation today and very excited to dive in. And I wanted to really start by asking, being in an industry that's evolving and innovating as fast as things happen in robotics and that has so many complexities, I wanted to ask a little bit about your mindset and strategic thinking, like back to 2017 when you were starting the company. What were the market dynamics taking place? What kinds of needs and opportunities in the market did you see? And how did that shape your approach and focus for the company?
Would love to. I'm a technologist at heart. And just to share my mindset, I've been dreaming about robots way back since I was a kid. Had an excellent opportunity to come to Stanford, to study AI and robotics, did my PhD there, and worked alongside some of the best and brightest minds in the industry in academia. 2017, there were a lot of factors at play when it came to AI and robotics. And to give you a bit of a quick perspective in robotics, the field of robotics has been in industry for almost 40 years now. Robots have been around since the 1980s, and they were traditionally very, very successful in manufacturing because it's feasible to program them once and have them very precisely and very repeatably do a task again and again and again on a manufacturing assembly line. The real challenge is that the moment you step outside the perfection of the manufacturing assembly line and you enter the real world, and that starts right the moment you get out of a factory and say you load something into a truck, precision goes out the window and it needs to be replaced with a remarkable degree of intelligence. Now, we call this type of intelligence physical AI. Humans are adept at it. In fact, it's one of the first things we learn when we're kids. And there had been decades of industrial progress, of research progress in the hardware to develop robots that were pretty capable. There had also been decades of progress in sensors, in understanding advanced robotics controls, to the point where in 2017 we felt that the time was right for us to take a deep dive and just go for building an AI that would allow robots to have human-like skills. There were a lot of industrial macroscopic factors that played into our thought process as well. One was that when we look at a lot of the developed countries around the world, we have an aging population. A lot of folks are getting older. They're stepping out of the workforce. And yet our expectations of our industrial and logistics enterprise continue to increase. We're making a pretty large shift towards a digital e-commerce driven economy. We order things on our phone, they end up at our doorstep, and somebody has to get all of that work done. So from a macroscopic perspective, there was going to be a great opportunity in the market, in particular in logistics. And the technology had advanced to a degree where the foundations in software, in hardware, and in AI had matured to a point where it was feasible for us to go ahead, productize, and have a constructive, positive impact within the logistics industry and hopefully within the larger market across the world at large.
Great, great. I'm interested, like within like industry analysis, did you, it sounds like you knew you were starting with logistics because of the opportunity there. How did you think about like segmenting the market from either a global perspective or kind of the size and complexity of the customers? Can you talk a little bit about what that process looked like for you?
Absolutely. The way to segment the market for us was to identify opportunities where we could add business value with maybe development and R&D that could be achieved within the spans of what a startup could deliver, and that could be achieved within a span of a few years. The reason we chose logistics is that it is a next logical step in the adoption of automation outside the factory. Literally, you build something in a factory, and robots are already very successful in factories and manufacturing lines. You want to ship it out, you put it in a truck, and boom, you're loading boxes into trucks, which turns out to be a very sophisticated, challenging problem, and someplace that we could add great value. There were a couple of other factors that went into our decision, and these were mostly focused on where we could maximize the productivity of the technology that we would be able to develop. When we think about adopting robotics in logistics, you can broadly segment them into two buckets. One type of logistics involves what we call storage and retrieval. These are storage warehouses. You build something, you ship it somewhere, you store it. And when the time is right, say, imagine an automotive spare parts warehouse. A car broke down, somebody needs a new fender, boom, you click, fender, somebody in a warehouse walks over to an aisle, picks up this thing and ships it to you. Storage and retrieval has the bulk of the work associated with storage and retrieval. There's another type of warehouse where the bulk of the work is associated with getting stuff in and out the door in a very short amount of time. And naturally, you would expect, we call these distribution-oriented warehouses. And distribution-oriented warehouses are a buzzing beehive of activity, and there's just a lot of work that's happening. And that's a prime example of this is the parcel industry, which is what we ended up focusing on. We can add a lot of value. There's sporadic bursts of work where robots can fill the gap if labor force is inaccessible. And that was an interesting and exciting technical problem for us to solve. It came down to building AI-driven applications for truck loading and unloading, palletizing and depalletizing, or sorting parcels, miscellaneous other variations of that.
I'm curious to hear, I've had a number of conversations lately around kind of emerging and disruptive technology and kind of the differences, whether your customer is looking for a solution and you're just trying to convince them that you're the right solution versus they don't know that something like this exists. And how do you kind of bring them along that journey and kind of find the early adopters? So curious, which camp did your kind of early customers fall into and how did you navigate that?
For a startup, I would say there's always a bit of an experimentation phase required for us to find our footing. And fortunately at Dexterity, we were very, very customer focused and we were problem solvers. I think in my PhD days, I was a deep technologist. I would get thrilled by technology. And we trained ourselves to get very, very thrilled by customer problems that would have large impact. And so when we started the company, we went out, talked to many customers and asked them what would their biggest problems be. Our approach at Dexterity has been to build a generic platform-style AI of AIs. Now, let me explain. When we look at AIs that are being developed today, one style of AI would be what you might see in chatbots. These are massive neural network models that are these, gigantic sets of weights and connections and graphs. And somehow they capture amazing amounts of data and process them in a way that makes them look very, very intelligent. This is not always successful when it comes to physical AI, because physical AI means that you have to run it on a small computer out in the field. And so we adopted what we would call an AI of AIs approach, where we have a series of small AI models, each of which solves a particular task. And then we have a bit of a orchestrator, as we call it, the arbiter, that switches between them at the right amount of time. And taking this out to solve problems meant that we had to select problems where the problem was accessible for us to break down into a lot of sub-problems and compose it to add commercial value. So our platform approach led us to create, at this point, like hundreds of little AIs. And the problems that they could solve centered around handling corrugated, heavy boxes that needed to be stacked into pallets or into trucks, or sorted at conveyor belt lines. And it turns out there's a shared degree of work, because no matter what you do in logistics, you take an item, you put it in a box or a poly bag or some other mailer, and you shuffle it around here and there. And so having built that core technology, we were able to very successfully map it to customer workflows and arrive at a common technical program that would serve the needs of many, many customers. We started, of course, in parcel. We've announced our collaboration with customers like FedEx and UPS. We expanded our focus into retail and e-commerce, working with a bunch of customers there, and soon potentially also going to expand our focus into air logistics.
Have there been any surprises as far as like which industries or sort of segments within the market have been kind of latching onto this?
Numerous surprises, I would say. And the surprises, I think, center around understanding the customer's businesses and understanding their operational needs, and being able to draw a direct connection between the amazing visuals that we see when we see AI-driven robotics and the actual financial impact to the business case. When we think about enterprises, we can segment the market into very, very large enterprises. These are multinational companies doing tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue. The smaller enterprises, which are more maybe constrained in scope, and then there's small businesses, and they have their own constraints. We chose to focus on working with very large enterprises for a few reasons. The first being that their problems are very real and they have huge scale. So if we go out and make investments in technology, we can be quite confident that those investments in technology will have a commercial impact at a scale that will really drive some degree of change in the world. So now, focusing on large enterprises, the surprises for us came alongside the realization that these companies have almost a responsibility to society. They have deeply complicated operations, and operational disruption has a very real impact. If you look at a parcel carrier, for instance, a couple of parcels getting missorted means there's some people out there that may not get their little birthday present the next day, and they might not be very happy about it. And so the degree of quality, the degree of safety, the degree of operational seamless integration required to make these customers successful was a wonderful learning for us. I think it just makes the problem a whole lot more exciting, but also makes the problem a whole lot harder. And if we end up solving them, which I believe we're on track to do, it allows us to add value in a way that would allow us to have a very successful business.
Yeah. So, what are some of the changes to the market landscape more recently, and how have those impacted go-to-market efforts, your sales, your marketing, and in the stage that you're in currently?
So when we started in 2017, the market macroscopic conditions were such that there was a looming retirement period for baby boomers that was going to come up. It was projected that baby boomers getting older, they would start retiring the 20s, maybe by 25 or so, a lot of them would have retired. And we had this COVID pandemic, which I think accelerated a lot of transitions out of the workforce, as well as a massive reset of the way people rely on e-commerce logistics. It had a pretty major impact, I would say, on customers' thought processes around how strategically important AI, in particular physical AI and robotics, is. And so we found that recently customers have all started to put in strategic transformation programs. There's a top-level imperative for them to find ways to increase their productivity, increase their resilience when it comes to things like pandemic, be able to rely on automation and upskill their workforce from doing sometimes very stressful and laborious tasks towards being technical operators of advanced AI-driven machinery, which will allow them to actually feel quite a bit more excited about what they're doing.
Oh, Samir, I'd love to switch gears a little bit. You've talked a few times about being a technologist. I want to ask you a bit about your leadership style. Can you talk a little bit about how you uniquely show up as a leader, and how do you think that's impacted your organization?
Leadership styles are, I would say, things that evolve as we grow, and I'm happy to give you, a short history of how we operate here at Dexterity. When we started Dexterity, it was a group of friends out of Stanford, and we all care pretty deeply about each other, greatly value focusing on the customer, really value teamwork, really value being clear, transparent, open, and just encourage leadership across the company. And so when we took our inclinations, I think we've built that Dexterity, a leadership style that encourages people to go out, do the best that they can. Really, we love having people here who can see the positive impact that robotics and physical AI could have on society. People who are very committed, and being surrounded by people like that, I think the best thing a leader can do is to empower them to do the best that they can, serve as a thought partner, pick up complicated problems, solve them, work alongside people, support them. And I think it's been a fantastic pleasure. I'm very, very glad to say that we have about 200 people at Dexterity. These are some of the best and brightest minds in robotics. We have offices now in California. We have a distributed presence across the United States. We have an office in Japan, a small office in Taiwan, one in India, and we'll probably be setting up operations in Singapore at some point of time. So it's a pretty eclectic crowd of people who come from many different cultures, countries, backgrounds, education levels, but we're all united in our mission to go out and transform enterprise operations with physical AI and robotics. So it's super fun.
Yeah,
Really
yeah, that
having a
is
good
quite
laugh.
yeah. I mean, that's quite the global presence for the size of organization. What other things that you do to kind of bridge any cultural differences or kind of connect people across different geographies?
So I'm a big believer in the human connection. Bit of a family guy myself. Got a loving wife, 2 kids. Deep connections, a lot of friends, and we're working on physical AI over here, and the physical part of it is very important for us. So we believe in coming to work every day. We meet our global teams. We travel quite a bit, and that personal physical connection allows us, I think, to have a high degree of confidence in each other. We spend time with each other's families. I think those are the things that bind us together, and of course, the mission drives us towards a common goal. At the end of the day, we're all people. As long as we care about each other, we're driven towards a common goal. I think we do very well together. And I must say, we're very communicative, we're very open, and whatever we say ends up being broadcast to half the company, which keeps us all in alignment.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. Are there any moments that were challenging to lead through, or kind of any difficult points in your growth that you would speak to as a leader?
I can attest to many. Let me pick a few that I think might serve an audience. If anybody out there is thinking about doing a startup, particularly in the deep end of technology, one of the things to realize is that in a startup, generally people think about startups from the lens of software SaaS startups. There are a lot of software startups out there. There are fewer hardware startups out there. There are even fewer software and hardware full stack startups out there. And very, very few, I would say a third bucket of work is actually technology. And technology development is a little bit independent of software engineering and hardware engineering. And so we have a full stack company here. We work on software, we work on technology, and technology is AIs, a lot of other systems level technical analyses and things that allow us to add value at an operational level. So software, technology, and hardware, doing all three together is very hard. So the challenge over there was, I think it's humanly impossible for even a very, very brilliant mind to just fit it all in. So one has to learn to trust, one has to inspire a great degree of trust, get a leadership team in place where we can work together, where we can successfully delegate. And that takes time. It's tricky. Many factors, finding the right people, I think has been one of the really tricky things. And we're pretty happy about where we are. But, who knows how things will progress in the future.
Yeah, yeah. What helped you in that journey? Because I would imagine most of your kind of studies and PhD was much more on the kind of technology side. So how did you kind of build and develop your own leadership skills at the helm of all of this?
Yeah, my PhD was actually really focused on studying human motion, and I'm a big fan of there's a lot of when you look at Hollywood, there's a lot of movie actors they really try to embody their role, and you'll see them, they sign up for a movie for 3 months, they just stop using their own name, they live the character, and by the time they start filming the movie, they're really like into it. And so I kind of really got into this understanding people thing, primarily because I wanted to understand people from a physical perspective so we could transfer their skills into robots. But I think, putting your own thoughts aside, technologist or not, and trying to just broadly understand how people think, how people move, what type of way they interact with the world, I think forces you to be a little bit humble. And I think that went a long way. At Stanford, of course, we're surrounded by some very, very bright minds, get a lot of exposure to leaders, to folks who come and go from different parts of the world. I think all of that helps. I would say, for a business, at the end of the day, businesses are intended to make money. And if you have a good sense, they're actually quite logical. You got to make money somehow, and you're doing something, and you want to map the value of what you're doing to somebody's need so you can make money. And so I think that analytical training helps us keep the foundations clear. Sort of a deep connection with other people allows us to keep our minds and hearts clear. And then it's a little bit of a luck of the draw. Who do you end up working with, and what circumstances did the market present you? But we learn along the way, and we stay humble and just assimilate information as fast as we can. Surround ourselves with great people. I think, life decides the rest.
Well, I'm intrigued by what you said about studying human motion, and I'm curious if there are things that you think you view differently than the average person, just as you're kind of out and about in society because of your expertise. Do you have any examples that come to mind?
Oh, absolutely. I love this. In fact, with a lot of customers, when we talk to them, ask them like a very simple question, like, "Hey, you have a cup of coffee in front of you. Could you just pick it up and take a sip?" And so be like, "Hey, great, I got this little cup of coffee or this can of water, and I take a sip." And then I ask them, "How did you do that?" And everyone's like, "What do you mean by how did you do that?" It's like, "I just picked it up and I took a sip." I was like, "Well, now just imagine you're a robot. And let's try to break this down to a level that a robot could actually copy you." And suddenly you get into, why did you pick your right hand and not your left hand? What direction was your eye looking? Did you actually feel that the cup was hot, and so you grabbed it from the handle rather than the other side? Did you feel like it was, almost up to the top, so you're moving very slowly? And you start listing down all the little things that you have to do to get a simple task like pick up a cup of coffee and take a sip, or pick up your phone and hand it to somebody. It's a great sort of realization that our brains are just doing enormously complicated things. And so when I did my research into human motion, I actually spent, I would say, substantially long time, maybe a year and a half, pretending to treat my own body as a robot. And hey, if I was really controlling it the way I'd control a robot, I have to do every little thing. And so it's given me a great appreciation for the nuances of why tasks that seem very simple for us as humans are actually extraordinarily complicated for robots. And these days, we're surrounded by amazing AIs that are chatbots. They do some brilliant reasoning. They'll write you a poem. I'm a bit of an amateur poet. It takes me a long time to write one, and this AI just cranks it out, right? And I'm like, so there are things that are very hard for us that tend to be very easy for AIs, but there are things that are very easy for us that tend to be very hard for AIs. And I think this is it's really appreciating this point. I think it requires you to think quite a bit about physical AI. It's actually, I believe it's called Moravic's paradox or something like that. But if you were to pick out one thing, I'd say that's a thing that, we live and breathe every day as we work with robots, but a lot of people don't really know about it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm probably going to go through the rest of my day now paying attention to my movement and the people around me differently, because I think you're right. There's so many things that we take for granted. It reminds me of there's like the exercise of creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you have to give the step-by-step instructions. And people skip over a lot of steps because they're just so obvious to us.
Yeah.
But once you have to really explain it step by step and break it down, you realize all of that. Fascinating.
It's quite fascinating.
I'm curious, you mentioned poetry and then poetry with AI. Have you used AI to try to create any of your poetry?
That's a sore spot. I can't bring myself to do it. It's, I feel like, I feel a little bit like probably how, the chess champions, like you had this guy, Gary Kasparov, or there was this Go champion, and, they're like really great at their thing. And that they bump their heads against a computer and it's just like better. So I'm still, kind of keep a stake in my shell, and I poem here and there. But I'm too afraid to go out and get AIs to do it because I feel like I'm going to lose my touch.
Oh, yeah.
It's a sore spot.
I think in any sort of creative work, and we've felt this on our team with designers, videographers, right? There's such a pride of craft.
Yeah. I mean, I laugh about it. It's I don't know how things are going to play out, but as humans, we got to value our creativity a little bit, right?
Yeah. I think we're going to be very humbled as a race, a human race, as AI continues to advance.
Interesting times.
Yes, for sure. I'd love to talk maybe a bit more about some of the changes that your customers are going through, because you talked a little bit about the aging workforce and kind of where technology is better enabling them. But can you talk about, what are the transformations that they're going through, and kind of how are they navigating that?
So I think one of the key events is that AI is now starting to be pretty commonplace. When you have things like your chatbots, there are hundreds of millions of people using them. They're in the news every second day. The largest companies in the world now have market capitalizations that are overwhelmingly driven by this impending projection of AI becoming even more commonplace than it already has become. And so I think the message has sunk in, and people respond differently to the message. Large enterprise customers, obviously, oftentimes are companies that are very mature. They're very process-driven. And if you have a lot of processes that you've built over decades and decades, there's a quality processes, safety processes, sometimes vendor management processes, controls for making sure that operational efficiency is high. So they have to think very carefully to understand how to introduce AI in a constructive way that's not going to cause a big ruckus. And that's something we realized was very difficult to do. It was even difficult for us to do. We'd be working with customers for many years, and we'd continue to learn about their operations. And when you have a company with hundreds of thousands of people globally, it's not very easy to understand every little nuance of what is going to make you successful. And we adapted our approach over there to almost take a consultative program approach where we now work alongside customers up and down the level of seniority to collect data from their operations, identify the lowest risk points for the introduction of AI, build all the proof points that get the key stakeholders to understand what the pros and cons are, what the business impact is going to be. Yes, you might need to make deep investments today, but you'll reap the dividends, 3 to 4 years from now. And so the gears are turning, basically. And I think a lot of people are starting to understand the impact, but we still aren't at a stage where you can just pull up a spreadsheet and just crank out every little minute impact on your operation. I think we're going to get there in a few years. Once we get there, adoption will accelerate because it de-risks the adoption in the minds of the customer. But those spreadsheets are being made slowly. The risks, the safety impact, the operational impact, all of those are being carefully analyzed. And there are people devoted to it in almost every customer organization that we know.
Specifically to look at the ROI and all the calculations. And
it's the ROI and the operational impact. I would say ROI is associated with the upside. What am I going to get out of it? There's also risk management, which sometimes doesn't show up in the ROI equations. And then there's a strategic value add that steps outside the ROI equation. So 3 buckets. There's the ROI, of course. The ROI is the easiest one of the lot. The operational risk management sometimes takes very long because it's pointing to the core processes that the company might need to change as they operationally transform. And then there's a strategic upside, which is the reason why they would do it to begin with. All 3 need to be addressed.
Yeah. Well, and I would think too, for a lot of these, like the organizational model, like the staffing model and things like that could need to look different. I'm curious, like at the top, are organizations, are you finding them kind of hiring new leaders and new teams to lead these kinds of initiatives, or trying to upskill existing resources? What are you seeing there?
I think companies, it varies by every company. Some folks bring in leadership with deep technical expertise if they feel like there's a gap there. Other companies, obviously, people who understand the business are the best suited to make these changes and understand the deep impacts to the organization. So I think there's massive value associated with industry leaders who've been there, who've been doing it for a long amount of time. And I think from what we've seen, those are people who end up playing a very, very strategic role in the adoption of AI. So I think we've seen every flavor of new leaders, existing leaders upskilling, people adjusting their roles, people reorganizing their company to make it more efficient, more amenable. It's every conceivable permutation out there.
Yeah, yeah. I do think we're coming to a time where like every business leader needs to be more of a technologist, not necessarily the nitty gritty, but needs to understand a lot more than they necessarily needed to before.
I love that thought. I love that thought.
So Samir, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about you. You talked a little bit about having a passion for robotics and being very family oriented. Can you tell me a little bit about, your background? What were your first robotics experiences? How did you get to where you are?
I was a kid who grew up in back then what was a small town in India up in the mountains. I was a bit of a mountain kid. A little bit like running wild in the jungles and hiking here and rock climbing there and jumping into the river and things like that. We had a lot of fun. I was very fortunate to have parents who just taught me to read a lot of books. And I think my dad loved science fiction, and he had this big science fiction library, and I think I read almost all of it by the time I was like 10, 12 years old. We had a computer in the house, and so I was obviously thrilled by computers, mostly because of the computer games, but also for to learn how to program and things like that. And I think technology is fascinating. The future is fascinating. I'm drawn to it. How AI is going to develop is a deep question, I think, but that we all care and should care a lot about. My first experience with robotics was actually at Stanford. I was fortunate to get in. A lot of times it's a luck of the draw. Stanford's at the forefront of AI and robotics research right now worldwide. And came in and saw these machines moving around. And till then, I'd done a lot of simulation. I used to do a lot of math. But there's just a certain joy with writing something in a computer and boom, there's this machine and it's suddenly doing something, and it's moving, it's picking up stuff. It's just amazing. And it's hard to describe that feeling. And you feel like, wow, I wrote the program that got the robot to do that. And so that goes a long way. Since then, I've had a chance to dabble, starting off with the math, with the AI, to software engineering, to built a lot of robots, worked with understanding how to transmit human skills into the robots. I think it's just fun. When we had kids, now our kids just absolutely love coming to the office, and the long trips that you take, they get offset by the great smile on your daughter's face. It's like, oh, my daddy, has got this cool robotics thing going on. So I think it's a joy. I would encourage everyone to get into robotics and AI. Trust me, once you get in, you see these things moving around. It's just like a deeply satisfying emotion. And I think we're going to see a huge transformation within our lifetimes. And I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I don't know how old your kids are, but I could say for my own kids, I've got an 8 and a 10-year-old, and
Yeah.
we tried to expose both of them to like coding and robotics. And my son was all about coding, and he likes the stuff like on a screen and kind of software logic and all of that. And then my
Yeah.
daughter needs everything like hands-on. So there was a
Yeah.
robotics class in her school, and just being able to see something physically moving around and all of that, like you could see her face lighting up. Not sure if your kids have had any direct experiences like that.
Oh yeah, they love it. My son's 6 and my daughter's 4, and we get them a lot of these like little construction kits, and they just love making it, and it's so much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thinking about, where you are now, from kind of who you were as a kid, I'm curious, knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given your younger self when you kind of first started in leadership?
You know, my younger self. So I would say there's a couple of things. When I just started off in my career, there's you start off, you're not sure about your place in the world, you're not sure about what you should be aiming for. And if I look around at my friends, a lot of us, it's like, hey, you can hop on this career ladder. You start off somewhere as a software engineer, then you make software engineer 2, then 3, then senior, and uh, the, it's very, very rewarding if what you pick up is a field that you can identify with at a deep level, where you get excited about thinking about the nuanced problems that you're solving. In the shower, just like standing there, 5 minutes pass, and you're like, oh, that little whenever the robot tries to pack this box in the truck, sometimes its cables get a little bit tangled. Like, how can I train it so that it kind of twists its wrist to untangle its own cables? It's like a nuanced, tiny little problem. But I get really excited about that. Get really excited about once we had cameras. And cameras have this USB connector, which you've been using. The challenge with USB is when it's cold, when it's hot, when it's out in a vibrating, dusty environment, it doesn't work that well. It keeps failing. So just like, can we improve USB and come up with this cool new connector that, you can just tightly screw in, and it's going to work when it's super hot, when it's freezing, and it'll still give it. So I think my only, my 2 cents, and I would be very reluctant to call it advice. My 2 cents to myself would be or to anybody else, just keep that spark alive. Just do something where it's not just about a career ladder. It's about finding problems that you can devote yourself to. And I think it's a great privilege to be exposed to a life that gives you things that you get very excited about. You can, work. Then work is not work anymore, and you can invest in it. You can invest in family and your friends and learning, and look back a while later, and every day was a pleasure. It contributed to who you've become. And I think you can look back at a long, productive, happy life, and hopefully have had a positive impact on the world.
I love that. That very beautifully said.
It's the joy of creativity. Let's put it that way.
Yep. Yep.
You always keep a finger on it.
So Samir, this has been a fantastic conversation. And as we wrap up today, can you let our listeners know where they can reach you if they want to get in touch?
Absolutely. I'm available on LinkedIn. Yeah, we have an account on X, and there's dexterity.ai. Please take a look at the website. Feel free to contact us, and I think all the best.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, likewise, and really appreciate your time.
Wonderful. And thank you too to everybody that's listening. I know I loved hearing so much of what Samir shared with us. And so if today's episode gave you any valuable insights, and I'm sure that it did, please share this with someone. Spreading this kind of knowledge and experience really helps all of us grow as leaders and equips us to drive successful transformation in our organization. So thanks again. And this has been another fantastic conversation on Shift and Thrive. See you next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.